Hello and welcome to Big Picture. I am Vishal Dahiya and today we will talk about India and climate change with respect to the COP25. Now, the 25th conference of the parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change will be held in Spain from 2nd December this year. COP25 holds a lot of significance as countries prepare to move from pre-2020 period under Kyoto Protocol to post-2020 period under Paris Agreement. India is all set to stress upon the needs for fulfilling pre-2020 commitments by developed countries and that pre-2020 implementation gaps would not present an additional burden to developing countries in the post-2020 period. So what are the guiding principles for India at this particular meet and what are the various initiatives taken by India on this issue? For more on this, we're joined by a distinguished panel of guests in the studio today. Let me first introduce the guests to you, beginning with Professor C.K. Varshney, former Dean, School of Environmental Sciences, JNU. We also have with us Mr. Sandeep Sen, senior journalist and author on environmental and climate change issues, and Mr. Kumar Pande, former Additional Secretary from the Ministry of Environment and Forest. Let me begin with you, Sandeep, since you keep a lot of, eye on what exactly is happening on these aspects. What is it that India is going into this particular summit, that is COP25, the agenda and the guiding principles?
See, the agenda is what it was before. The main agenda is to reduce carbon and to pressurize developing countries to fulfill their commitments, which they have not done since the past 20 years, to reduce carbon. India consumes very little energy compared to the developed countries. Maybe the US consumes 20 times as much, and other developing countries consume at least 10 times as much as India. They produce so much carbon, and what India says that for our needs, we also require energy, and therefore, unless you reduce your carbon content, we cannot expand our carbon footprint. So that is the position which India has got for the last 8 to 10 years. But I'll say over here, it's not working. It has never worked and it will never work. The reason is because in 1992, in the Rio conference, we had this 13-year-old girl, Swain Suzuki, who did almost a same speech like what Greta Thunberg has done recently. So we have been talking about carbon reduction. We are not talking about carbon elimination. Carbon reduction means giving subsidies to the fossil fuel companies to reduce carbon. When 50 years ago, when renewable energy was discovered, at that time, had the countries invested only on renewable energy, we would have solved this problem by now. Today, we are in this period where if you see in 2014, the renewable energy prices, solar prices were 7 rupees 90 paisa per unit. By 2017, it came to 2 rupees 44 paisa per unit. If we invest in renewable energy instead of talking about reducing carbon, we will solve the problem because nobody will produce fossil fuel or thermal plants if we have renewable energy plants selling power at 1 rupee per unit.
So the idea is to go ahead and focus on that renewable energy. And India has taken a lead out
India
there.
Has taken
the ISA,
a lead.
the International Solar Alliance.
Yes, it has taken a lead. It's a huge turning point. And I believe that India should push for that let us transform and let us not talk about reducing carbon, let us talk about eliminating carbon.
Mr. Pande, India's stand has been consistent on this particular matter for quite some time now. And one of the major thread has been that the developed nation will have to go and pick up the tab for what they are doing or what they've done in the past, rather than pushing the onus on the developing countries.
Well, yes, pre-2020, the record of developed nations is not up to the mark. They haven't done anything. In fact, many of them exited from the Kyoto Protocol. And when it came post 2020 commitment, the major polluter, the major economy, US, has backed out. So I don't think developed nations will do anything. We can only expect, because climate change can be contained by consuming less and absorbing more, right? So consuming less from nations who have been consuming almost major resources of the world, expecting them to do that is difficult. But I think they can have more sinks, more absorption, at least what, if this cup of carbon has to be, if there has to be some space for us, a developing nation like India, whose energy requirement is massive, despite our commitment, and we have said we will reduce our emission intensity by 1/3, and we are doing that. We have a massive massive renewable energy program, as was being told by Mr. Sen. Developed world, I don't think they will. It's more talk than walk.
Okay.
Forums like this, COPs, this UNFCCC every year does put pressure on developed world, formally, informally, government, non-government organizations, civil societies. I think that might improve the situation if they invest more on renewable energy. And the thing is to get the costs down to a level that all of us can afford. It should be, renewable energy today should be a public good, a public good, and the incremental costs, the private, because developed world, it's private companies who invest. So if they want to, recover that from developing world, sorry, that will not happen.
Okay.
That should not happen. That should be absorbed by developed nations, and it could be a public good. International Solar Alliance is one institution, I think, that needs to be, really supported, and in renewable energy could be a public good, and I think that might solve that part of consuming less.
Okay. Okay, we will come to that part as well. But Professor Varshney, one very interesting aspect out here is that the commitments are made in these meetings, and this is the 25th such meeting which is happening, the conference of parties. And a recent United Nations report says that the commitment made by countries are not enough. It's painting a very bleak picture. It says it is not enough to stave off or to hold on that 1.5 to 2% rise in the temperature levels. We will have to do more. And by we, I mean both the developed nations and the developing countries as well.
Certainly, because the commitment that were made in 2015, which is now popularly known as Paris Agreement, and the NDCs which were really put forth on the table are totally inadequate to hold the global average temperature even at 2 degrees centigrade. And to talk of 1.5 degree, which is desirable, and beyond which the earth situation will become absolutely irrevocably serious. The question is that it has to be not only adhered to, but more ambitious commitments have to be made, and that is what is the requirement. And in fact, by 2030, we should be reducing carbon emission by 50%. And by 2050, it should be neutral. That is the amount of carbon that you emit, at the same time, the amount of carbon you are absorbing.
So but at the rate which we are doing it, is it possible?
Let me also give you this scenario. Since 2015, our carbon emission has increased, and increased at a much faster rate than in the previous years. So I think the picture is very gloom. Between the target and between the objectives that we want to achieve, there is a widening gap, which is frightening and at the same time is very difficult with the present scenario. So I think this summit, that is the COP25, is going to really discuss that how the countries can be persuaded
to really commit more aggressively so that we are able to really meet this issue of carbon emission and the global warming. The global temperature is increasing much faster, and the 3 reports which have come during the month of October, November and now clearly show. In fact, on Monday, WMO has released a report to say that the situation is very appalling. And if you see the cryospheric report which was published regarding the sea level rise, also shows that the previous predictions have been totally inadequate to really compare with the actual prevailing situation. You see what has happened in Venice. It is because that the kind of situations which one expects once in 10 years or 1 in 100 years are now repeating more frequently, and in future they are going to be more frequent. So I think the situation is very serious, and the previous models which have predicted 2 degrees to be reasonably safe is no longer valid, and therefore very seriously the issue has to be debated. There are 4 issues which are going to be discussed primarily.
Okay.
Number 1, that how countries can be persuaded to really complete their commitments which they have made during the Paris Agreement or under the Paris Agreement. And secondly, how they can be further made more aggressive. So I think by really providing the new data, a new set of figures which have come, and the realities that we are going to see. For example, we are now seeing widespread wildfire in Australia. We have seen wildfires in California. We have seen wildfires in Europe, which are becoming so rampant and so frequent and are threatening now communities and so on and so forth. And it is a very, very serious problem.
Okay.
Not only that, they are destroying forests, which are a permanent, carbon absorbers, as Mr. Pande has said, that we have to create a capacity to absorb more carbon. So I think carbon absorbing capacity is decreasing on the one side. At the same time, the stored carbon is really pushed into an active form of carbon dioxide, which we want to really contain. So I think the situation is very difficult in that. So one aspect is this, which means switching of the energy to the renewable energy, which Mr. Jha has mentioned about. And also you will find that there are serious progress that we are making, but I think the speed of the progress is not matching with the target and with the challenge that is ahead of us.
Okay.
So I think there is a widening gap, which
Okay.
is very threatening and very, very, I should say, difficult to fulfill unless the countries really provide the kind of urgency to the whole issue.
Okay.
The second thing is that the parity issue is becoming very difficult. Looking at the unrest which is going on in Chile is one of the issues which is going to be discussed. That in this carbon debate, if we become aggressive and we do something, it should not enhance and escalate the parity which is already not there. So I think we should have the kind of mechanism by which we address the carbon emission issue. At the same time, we also use this opportunity and imaginatively and with creative thinking that how we can reduce the parity, increase the parity also. So
Okay.
that is number 1. Second issue is that carbon trading and the question of double counting. Because these were the issues which were left unattended and could not be resolved during the COP24, which was held at Katowice in Poland. So I think these issues are going to be taken up very seriously, because voluntary reduction of carbon emission by some countries or institutions of industry can be possible and is actually going to be there. How they can internationally sell this?
Okay.
What is the mechanism which will govern? And how this is going to be accounted for? The country which sells or the country which purchases? If it is going to be accounted in both sides, then I think it is very difficult. So I think these issues were discussed, were found to be very difficult at that time to resolve, which is going to be taken up now.
Okay.
And another 2 issues which are relating to assessment of loss and damages. Because you know that 2013, we established Warsaw International Mechanism, which is known as WIM, which purpose was that what is that countries cannot do or goes beyond their capacity in terms of recovering the damage or in terms of repairing the damage.
Okay.
And therefore to assess that what kind of compensation do they deserve. And the last point which is going to be also attracting much attention and thought and discussion would be the question of finance and capacity building.
Okay.
Now, here it is very important that whatever they have committed, they are not fulfilling. And this has been a persistent issue ever since the Paris conference. And this is going to be discussed very elaborately this time.
Okay, so these are, most important aspects, and to put it in perspective, as Professor Varshney has pointed out, these are going to be the highlights. But Mr. Sen, I'd like to bring you on this important thread which is there amongst all these things, and which Professor Varshney started with, as to our objectives are not in sync with what our target is.
It will never be. If we are talking about carbon trading, if we are talking about equity, if we are waiting for somebody to give us the money, which they will never do, we can talk for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, but they will never do that.
Okay.
They are walking out of agreements, they are making commitments. It has never happened. We have seen Kyoto Protocol before Paris thing. And there was a lot of money which was invested into carbon trading and subsidies, but nothing happened. So, because we are looking at the wrong direction, because the COP conference is still headed towards the wrong direction of carbon trading, of reducing carbon by subsidizing fossil fuel companies, that is why we are making a mistake, and that is a mistake we continue to make. And that is why we are not getting any results.
So we'll have to move to the
So we
renewable
have
energies.
to move to a place where we have positive solutions and not think of negative incentives to the carbon industry. We have to think about doing something positive independent of what make them unviable. You see, the thing is, we produced 9 gigawatt of renewable energy in 2017 as against 1 gigawatt in 2014. Now, after that, the pace of renewable energy production went down. Now, suppose we were able to sustain it. China that year produced 60 gigawatt of renewable energy. So, suppose we were able to, then the price of renewable energy would have come down below 2 rupees 44 paisa per unit, which was the last auction price in 2017, which was the lowest. So, if we had pushed that envelope further, suppose the unit rate becomes 1 rupee or 50 paisa, then who will invest in coal power? Nobody will, because it's not viable. And therefore, the push will come towards making something which is profitable. Humans react to profit.
So you're saying it has to be made unviable?
It has to be made unviable.
Okay.
Let us try to make coal unviable.
Okay. Professor Varshney, do you agree with that point of view? And it looks, difficult, but is that possible in the long run?
I think it is all possible, but that time is a big factor. You see, the window that is available to us is so short and rapidly closing. In fact, it is almost near closing. We have global temperatures are already increased by 1+ degree, and 1.5 is not very far. And if we see the amount of fossil fuel investment that the world has committed so far, we would be surprised to know that by 2030, substantial increase in fossil fuel production is going to be. So the question is that all these things are very fine. We know that globally, the percentage contribution of total energy that is being used from the renewable energy is increasing, but it is not increasing at a pace and at a rapidly as it is required, and it is not possible unless substantial investments are being made in order to replace the existing power plant and so on and so forth. And that is the reason the question of finance is going to be considered. That is the reason of question of parity is going to be considered. That is the reason of assessment of loss and damage, because certain countries which are small countries, and they are many in number, whose resources and finances are too meager to really attend to this kind of a shift to energy mix. And therefore, the kind of money which is known as green fund, which they have committed. So the idea is that the pressure must come to really put them and to really remind them of their commitment and see, as of now, $59 billion have been committed, while $100 billion per year was supposed to be provided. And 28 countries have committed, out of which 12 have doubled their contribution since 2015. So I think this is something which is very small. We have to remind that oil producing countries and other oil producing nations and other industries and other developing countries must chip in to really fulfill this commitment. And even $100 billion is not enough. That was also a very token sum. So I think these are the issues which are going to be discussed, unless not only any one country, but the world and global community as a whole is going to suffer irreparably and unpredictably to a very serious level.
Okay, let me bring in Mr. Pande here. Let's look at the Indian perspective of the things out here and the way India has moved. And as Mr. Sen has also pointed out earlier in the show that an initiative like the International Solar Alliance, and one thing which seems to be very clear and common out here, that we'll have to move on both the parts simultaneously. One is to try and build on our capacity of renewable sources, and two, try and bring in the parity as well between those nations. So in terms of India's initiatives in the past as well, where do we stand, Mr. Pande?
Well, we are doing our bit, and climate change is reversible, right? And global level, developed countries, as we have all discussed, are not going to do much. They are not going to help us. Public fund, green climate fund, or even Solar Alliance, I don't know whether they are chipping in. But the technology is essence, and it's a high time a country like ours innovate, because temperate countries are not going to innovate, or at a as I said, at a cost which is affordable to us. So we have plenty of sunshine. We have to innovate. I think we need to jack up our research money, our money on innovating solar. Because we are a country, tropical country. See, when ozone layer was under threat, temperate countries, the developed countries who have already controlled climate, they are not impacted by climate change. Climate change, we are impacted. So we have to set our house in order. And our initiative of International Solar Alliance was excellent, will be excellent, provided we take the lead in innovating a cheaper mode of producing solar power.
Okay.
And I think we can do it. Only thing is, we would need our best efforts, and we will have to go beyond, ecology is beyond political, it has to be a long drawn process, but as was being mentioned, time is very short. Time is very short, but notwithstanding that, I think we need to innovate best way, and I think we are trying to bring down the cost. Our ambitious plan, 175 gigawatt, and so on and so forth. This is, if you think on this, it's very difficult. But we ourselves have given ourselves a challenge, and I think we will attain that.
Okay.
National Action Plan on Climate Change of 2008. Our missions are on track. Only thing is technology and finance. The four things. In fact, in climate change, what has happened? The terminology keeps on changing. The basic
concept is same.
Concept remains finance and technology. Finance,
Okay.
public fund, no country is going to give you
Okay.
beyond what in their ODA is, and ODA has never been adequate.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Sen, final concluding words from you in terms of what we've done, as in India has done, and what is it that our plan should be from here onwards?
See, first thing, what Professor Varshney was saying, that we have to create more carbon sinks. So Supreme Court, I think, has released something like 700 or 800 crores, which was kept as penalties, from the industry for this forest development fund. So that is something which
The Campa funds.
Yeah, the Campa funds. So those should be immediately given to the states, and there should be a body which starts implementing that and putting up forests in every state. First thing is that. Second thing is that we must invest in battery technology. We must invest in solar. We must, because this is the tipping point which we are at. We are at a very unique place in the world, and if we invest more and if we can bring disruptive change over there, I am confident that we will be able to meet this climate change challenge, and this is going to just go downhill, the carbon, this thing, if we are able to reduce the cost. So that is the
Professor Varshney, final 30-second concluding word from you as to how should we deal with it as far as India is concerned.
I think India has moved very rapidly and is going to complete its commitment which it has made during the Paris Agreement. Now what it's trying to do is to demonstrate that it is possible to hold on to your commitments and to complete this, and as well as look very optimistically for making them more aggressive, both in terms of providing assistance to the developing countries and to really compensate for their loss. And secondly, I would like to say that at present, during these years, we can say that the science of climate change is very clear. The means of really reversing climate change is also very clear. And also, given the means and technology, it is also very clear. What is really needed is a firm commitment and a kind of cooperative behavioral attitudinal change by the developing countries towards the developed countries towards the developing countries, and the political will and a determination. And I think this can be solved. And some of these issues are going to be discussed, that how we can really bring this kind of a cohesion where three elements are there: the political will and a global commitment has to be made. And that is what is going to be, to my mind, one of the things which require to be done through these conferences by impressing upon each other and the states and the global community.
Okay, so there it is. As our panelists have pointed out, the all in all of the problem of climate change. And as our panelists are pointing out, and we read it everywhere, we know what is the extent of the harm which climate change can do to us or is doing to us. And we also know the way to go ahead and tackle this problem. The only thing which is required is the commitment as well as the will to move forward and appreciate and help each other. That is, all the nations, be it the developed or the developing ones. So let's wait as to what the participating countries discuss at COP25. We'll bring you up speed on what goes on there in Spain. We'll come back again tomorrow with a different topic and different set of guests. Till then, keep watching Rajya Sabha Television.